He didn't understand the rules of the game. That's why he had to die. Guy Madison was once carved as the perfect archetype of the American man. Tall, handsome, and projecting an air of invincibility. For decades, he embodied heroes who never fell, becoming a masculine icon worshipped by an entire generation of viewers. But that brilliant aura never truly reflected the man behind it. More than half a century later, James Arness, Guy Madison's closest friend, finally decided to break a lifetime of silence. He confirmed the shocking rumors, ranging from the press-fueled claims that Guy was actually female, to the times he was coerced into appearing at the hedonistic parties of the Hollywood elite. Yet, the greatest mystery lies in another detail. After the age of 40, women almost completely vanished from Guy Madison's life. They disappeared without a trace, as if an invisible hand had erased them to hide a truth that was not permitted to exist. So, what did James Arness actually reveal? How did those belated confirmations redraw the portrait of Guy Madison, when he was no longer an undefeated screen god, but merely a lonely man, suppressed and wounded to his core? 1. He was too beautiful, so beautiful that people used to rumor he was a woman. That was the revelation from James Arness, the spark for one of the cruelest chains of speculation Guy Madison ever endured in his career. According to Arness, Madison possessed a face that was unrealistically perfect, absolutely symmetrical features, flawless skin, and eyes steeped in a profound sadness. But that very perfection became a system error in the Hollywood of that era. In an age of rugged men like John Wayne or Kirk Douglas, Madison's overly soft appearance suddenly turned him into a displaced outlier. From that difference, a poisonous legend was born. People began whispering that Guy Madison was actually a woman. They wove a thrilling script that the studios had used sophisticated makeup techniques to mold an artificial male deity. Tabloids claimed they had found a girl with a specific bone structure and crafted a product to fill the American public's thirst for a new masculine ideal. From then on, every mundane gesture of Madison's was turned into evidence. The tears in the makeup room were scrutinized. His avoidance of wild parties, his habit of always locking the door when changing, all were twisted into a conspiracy. The public was constantly looking for a way to prove he was a fraud. Faced with that wave of malice, James Arness merely brushed it off with a dry laugh. It was a ridiculous joke. But that joke was never harmless. Even as a baseless rumor, it left a scar on Madison's soul. It was the clearest evidence of Hollywood's brutality. When they cannot fully possess a person, they find a way to distort them into a grotesque entity. And when conspiracy theories weren't enough to ruin a life, the next sentence was even colder. They stripped away his right to be recognized as an actor. 2. I had never seen Guy cry like that before. Years later, James Arness recounted a moment he called the most horrific night of Guy Madison's life. It was on the set of The Last Frontier. After more than 20 failed takes, the famously hot-tempered director completely lost control. In front of the entire crew, he hurled the script at Guy's face and roared, "You don't need to act, Madison. All I need is a statue that stands still." A deathly silence fell over the set. Guy Madison did not resist. He stood frozen like stone. But from his vantage point, James Arness could see those shoulders shaking violently with humiliation. The moment cut was called, Guy turned and walked straight toward his private trailer. When Arness opened the door and stepped inside, a haunting scene awaited. Guy Madison was frantically clawing at the foundation on his face. He clawed as if he wanted to tear apart the beauty that had become a cage for his soul. In a state of panic, he repeated a desperate plea over and over. "I want to act. I really want to act." The tragedy of the Hollywood Golden Boy didn't end there. When the story reached a producer, the only response Guy received was a pat on the shoulder and a mocking smile. "Guy, this role needs a weathered face, not a face to be printed on a cereal box for kids." That night, Guy Madison locked himself in his dressing room and cried until dawn. For 4 hours, James Arness stood silently guarding the door like a sentry. He stood there just to make sure that, in his despair, Guy wouldn't do something reckless. Later, James Arness remarked sorrowfully, "Guy wasn't as iron-willed as he looked. He was incredibly vulnerable." After that night of horror, it wasn't just Madison's confidence in his acting that shattered. His private life also began a long slide into darkness. 3. He had many male friends, but none of them were like Rory Calhoun. This was James Arness's revelation regarding Guy's romantic life. It was in the 1950s, when Hollywood still strictly forbade same-sex love. Though Guy was surrounded by many women, he often went fishing with Rory Calhoun. They frequently escaped lavish parties to find remote lakes, places beyond the reach of the press's lights. But that bond did not escape the eyes of the studio moguls. Private detectives were hired to tail them on their fishing trips. Cold warnings were delivered in dark rooms. If a single photo gets out, neither of you will ever stand in front of a camera again. To save one another, they were forced to stage a retreat. They were coerced into appearing on choreographed dates, arm in arm with stranger starlets. The peak of the pain came during a major party, when Rory Calhoun approached and instinctively reached out to place a hand on Guy's shoulder, a gesture of pure comfort. Guy flinched back slightly. At that moment, Guy's eyes were filled with terror. He saw the lenses lurking behind the curtains. Rory awkwardly withdrew his hand, leaving it hovering in midair. He gave a bitter smile. "Goodbye, my friend. Goodbye to our love." From that night on, a part of Guy Madison's soul died. He became sullen and withdrawn. Guy began to loathe his own existence. He understood that as long as he remained the public's male god, he would never have the right to keep the person he loved. When he turned 40, a strange thing happened. Women completely vanished from his life. While other actors chased heated affairs, Guy Madison preferred to live like a lonely ascetic rather than play the role of a fake romantic lead. James Arness summarized his friend's final years with a chilling truth. Guy didn't disappear. He simply withdrew from a game he knew for sure he could never win. Because as soon as Guy Madison stepped into the shadows, the world he rejected charged straight in another direction, where glaring lights, hard liquor, and endless parties became the mandatory rules of play. 4. People said behind Guy's back, "He doesn't understand the rules of the game," and in Hollywood, not understanding the rules means being eliminated. James remembered exactly where that was said. Not in an official meeting, but in a closed room, among moguls with terrifying power. It was an evening in 1950. A sleek black car was already waiting at the door. The studio's orders were clear. Madison had to be obedient and please the ladies who were yearning to touch the national treasure. But in truth, it was a disguised encounter. They wanted to use Guy Madison's beauty as a luxury dessert to trade for prestigious contracts. As Guy entered the room thick with cigarette smoke, the studio head approached and whispered, "Make them feel special, Guy. That's how you pay your debt for this fame." But Guy Madison didn't budge. He stood there, amidst the hungry eyes, scrutinizing him like merchandise. Guy didn't smile. Instead, he spoke in a calm but heavy tone. "I am an actor, not a toy." An awkward silence filled the room. The mogul turned pale, his smile freezing. He hissed through his teeth, "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? There are thousands of kids out there willing to get on their knees just to be in your position." The very next morning, the rules of the game went into motion. Major projects promised to Guy were suddenly suspended. Good scripts were handed to new faces who were more compliant. Madison was forced into B-movies, into shallow roles with no depth. They wanted to break his will, to make him come back and beg. But Guy Madison chose the opposite. He would rather be forgotten with his dignity intact than shine in humiliation. James Arness bitterly concluded, "Guy kept his integrity, but he lost the world. They never forgive someone who dares to say no to them." When Hollywood turned its back en masse, Guy Madison did not protest publicly. But in the dark, he began doing something else. He recorded it all. And those words, biting, sharp, and full of rage, would become the most dangerous evidence of a Hollywood that no one wanted to admit existed. 5. I never wanted to mention those notebooks, but they were truly horrific. According to James, Guy Madison had a nearly obsessive habit of taking notes. In his diary, Guy often wrote about how studios measured a human's worth using statistical charts. Madison called the high-profile couples on the red carpet subplots. He viewed scandals as merely controlled strikes. And to him, A-list stars were nothing more than a sale of souls by the pound. Once, Madison wrote, "Here, they don't love you. They only love the profit you bring. And when you're out of value, they'll discard you like an old newspaper soaked in rainwater." But a real tragedy almost exploded one evening on set. Madison accidentally left his notebook in a coat pocket in the dressing room. A cunning entertainment reporter, who had long sensed Madison's dissatisfaction, snuck in and stole it. He managed to read a few pages.